Welcome to the Core Outdoors Speaker Series webinar. I'm your host, adventure journalist Jamie Moy. Core Outdoors is a collective of gear designers, makers, repair technicians, and manufacturers based here in the mountainous Kootenay region of British Columbia. Once a month, Core produces its free webinar to build relationships in the industry and in the community and to share knowledge and foster information and innovation. For March, I'm delighted to introduce Chris Stone, senior designer at Durston. Chris recently moved to the Kootenays from Colorado, where he held a position as senior designer at the North Face. Chris has also in the past worked for, in design and sustainability roles for Arc'teryx and also for Burton. That's a heck of a resume, Chris. We're so happy to have you join us today.
Yeah.
We wanted to do kind of an informal Q&A type session as Chris went, but I might have to kind of walk things down a bit as you present since we are being hacked. Let's see how it goes. Let's go ahead and have you share your screen. See if you can share your screen because I locked down a couple things.
I should be able to. Okay. Well, you should be seeing the title page.
Yep, looks good.
Yeah, and then if you, at any point during the conversation, if anybody wants to throw questions in the chat, I can jump back and forth and try to answer those as I go. But we'll also leave some time at the end to answer any questions. But yeah, as Jamie said, my name is Chris Stone. I'm the designer here at Durston. I'm also a teacher and just an avid outdoor enthusiast. And I'll be presenting the weight of the logo. And that's basically, we'll just be taking a look through my career to date, which is relatively short, but kind of going through why I made decisions to move my career in a certain direction, the resources I was provided at some of these different stages, and then ultimately why I decided to move to Durston, a small cottage brand here in Golden, BC. So before I get into like the meat of the presentation, I wanted to lay out a few of like guiding principles that I look at when I'm trying to decide which direction to take my career, if I need to make a move or whatnot. And basically the three lenses that I look at that through is growth, impact, and lifestyle. Talking about growth, not so much as a ladder, not really trying to climb the corporate ladder. Titles don't matter too much to me. It is nice to make a good paycheck so I can buy snowboards and mountain bikes and things like that. But mostly I'm looking at expanding my radius of knowledge, experience, my network, and kind of trying to figure out different passions and whatnot. Things are always changing in terms of where I see my career going and the things I want to focus on. So growth is a huge part of that. Secondly is impact, mostly just leaving a positive lasting impact on the communities that I design for, the environment, and pushing athletes and really anybody of any ability to get out there and get after it. And then finally, lifestyle. I do work to live. I'm super lucky to be able to blend my passions outside of work with my work itself. I work as an outdoor product designer, and when I'm not in the lab here prototyping, I'm usually out in the field, backpacking, mountain biking, and putting all sorts of gear to the test. So it's pretty easy to, while I do feel like I'm on the clock all the time, it also feels easy enough to kind of get away from work while still being at work, if that makes sense. And then one last thing before we jump into the actual careers, I wanted to lay out like a super high level overview of kind of product creation process from anywhere from a small company to some of the larger ones. And more or less, this looks like pre-design, and then design and development, and then production. And there's a whole slew of teams and talents and roles and all sorts of things that go into each of these stages. And as I kind of go through each stage of my career, it'll be important to look at it through kind of the product creation lens and some of the resources that support each of those stages. So in pre-design, we're kind of talking about trend research, creative direction. We have color teams or single people looking into what's going to be popular in 2 years, kind of laying out, silhouettes, things like that, and ultimately creating some sort of brief or problem to solve and handing that off to design and development teams, or at least the design and development process. And again, this can look like anything from one person doing all of these jobs to 300 people supporting this: designers, developers, materials, trims, innovation, testing, athletes, costing, sample makers. All of that goes into actually taking an idea and making it a physical product. And then, at least for today's presentation, the final step is production. We've got supply chain, factories, QA, developers, and all of that. This isn't an all-encompassing list. I'm sure I've missed some things here, but just something to keep in mind as I talk about the resources that I've experienced in some of my roles. A quick timeline of what we'll be going through today. So it's crazy to me to think that I started my career almost 9 years ago. Well, before all of this, I went to undergrad school in Vermont for environmental studies, and graduated still not really having any clue what I wanted to do, at least career wise. So packed up the car with my buddy and moved to Portland, Oregon, which has a really rich design community. And the first job I got there was at North Street Bags. I was basically just cutting fabric. At the time, I thought that was just a job to pay the bills, but little did I know that it would lead to pretty much everything we're going to go through today. From there, I went to a grad program, specifically a master's in sports product design at the University of Oregon, where I learned my foundations, was able to land an internship at Burton, which then snowballed into a contract with Arc'teryx, and then learned a little bit about how I like to design, and then ended up moving to the North Face. And currently, back in December, I moved from Denver, Colorado, up here to Golden, to start to work with Dan Durston and the team up here. Okay, so jumping back to the beginning of that timeline, so chapter 1, North Street Bags. For each of these stages, I'm going to go through a why I made the move, the processes in place at each company, or at least the ones I experienced, the resources that I had at my disposal, and then ultimately why I exited the opportunity. And so the why for North Street Bags, like I just mentioned, it was a job to pay the bills when I got out of undergrad. I had no clue that it would form into what I believe will be a lifelong career in design. But here, my role was process engineer, mostly just a fancy name for fabric cutter / production line operator. But without having a formal design teachings before this, it was a really great place to get my hands dirty and learn how product goes from raw good to finished functional design. I worked as a fabric cutter for about a year, and then we operated on a lean manufacturing mindset. So we're constantly improving basically production. And I should mention at North Street Bags, all production happened under one roof. Pretty much everything from design to cutting to sewing to we had a showroom and then a lot of online sales. It all happened under there. So I got to see basically the whole process at a very small scale. But that meant I got to wear a lot of hats. There was maybe 10 of us at our height, mostly sewers. You can see a picture here of me tracing out some patterns. It was my first time I'd ever worked with patterns. And again, I had really no idea what the design and manufacturing process looked like. So I was able to learn a lot wearing tons of hats. And then in terms of the resources this job provided, we were small and scrappy. We had, the material things like a laser cutter, cutting table, sewing machines, and whatnot. And we also had a lot of knowledge under one roof. So Curtis, the owner there, was basically an entrepreneur with a design passion. So we were all kind of learning on the job. Sorry, I'm trying to read some of the comments here. Okay. We were all kind of learning on the job and just pushing the product in the way we thought it should go. Which is was super beneficial early in my career. I did end up convincing Curtis to allow me to design some of my first products, these wallets you can see here, which that orange one is the one I still use today. Um, but this chapter of my life, I knew I wasn't going to work here for the rest of my life. And it ended sooner than I thought because COVID hit and COVID did a lot of damages on small businesses. So I got laid off, but luckily, right around that time, I was already starting to think about going back to school for design. The first year I applied to the program, I got waitlisted. Spent the next year basically going to thrift stores, chopping up old jackets and turning them into backpacks like the one you see spinning here. But mostly just kind of honing my design portfolio. And the only resources I really had for that was a little home sewing machine and the internet. But that was enough to convince them to accept me into my grad program. My grad program. So this is where I really learned from people in the industry what it takes to design a well-functioning product that can be sold to bigger markets. They also taught me the importance of research and prototyping. This was kind of the two main areas that they really push students in. Their goal was to basically put makers out into the industry rather than just somebody who could sketch and get an idea across. And that's still foundational to my process today. But yeah, so in terms of process, it wasn't necessarily a process that you might find at some of these bigger companies, but rather they kind of gave myself and 19 other students every year. It was a 2-year program. The cohort was 20. But they would give us this playground to kind of workshop blue sky ideas, bounce ideas off each other, and then do that all in the comfort of a pretty world-class prototyping lab. So we had pretty much any sewing machine, industrial sewing machine you could want. We had 3D printers, laser cutters, vacuum formers, heat presses. We had all the things to take our idea basically out of our head, put it on paper, and then make it physical, which is, again, very much how I operate today. And another one of the beauties and resources that this program offered was just this really diverse pool of points of view from all of the students and teachers. So you weren't kind of getting, sometimes in the industry, things can be pretty linear, and an idea is head, and then it's just basically goes through a straight line to finish. Whereas this, as I mentioned before, was a lot of bouncing ideas off each other and whatnot. But anyways, this program taught me the foundations of my design process today. And after my first year, I was able to take my experience here and snowball that into an internship with Burton. So this was my first real foot in the industry. I was working with teams and whatnot for a brand that I lived and breathed since before I was even born. The picture in the bottom left, you can see my dad's 2 snowboards from the 80s, I think. And then my little youth board next to his, all Burton boards. I went to undergrad in Burlington, Vermont, which is where Burton based. So this was the first time where I really felt like my hard work in the program were starting to pay off, which I'm sure a lot of people can understand that, like, that's a really good feeling and really motivating. But at Burton, I was a 3D technical design intern. And so I sat with the design team, but I was mostly there to kind of aid them in their 3D process. I wasn't really designing products from the ground up. Which was great for this point in my career. Basically, I got to sit next to them while they did, fit sessions, they sketched, they prototyped and whatnot. And I would help them figure out how 3D, specifically Clo 3D, could help improve their process. So something I forgot to mention when I was in school, I took the opportunity. One of the big things I did in school that I'm very grateful for to this day is pretty much as soon as I got into school, I made a list of 10 or so of the companies that I would love to work for. And weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, I would go onto their jobs board and start to pull out jobs that I would either like to apply for right after school, or 5 years, 10 years down the road. I think I would love to um, have that role. And what I would do is go through each role and audit them for basically skills that they were looking for that would set people apart from other applicants. And one of the things I found doing that was 3D design was being mentioned more and more in these job postings. So I took it upon myself to teach myself CLO, which ultimately got me this job at Burton. And as we'll see later, helped me snowball this into my next role. But yeah, so I had the skill set in CLO, and I was basically helping the design team there sew up their concepts in 3D. We could do virtual fit sessions. We could throw the avatars in different poses, like you can see here. We've got a rider stance. I made the Jake salute, for those of you who know, and all sorts of other fun little projects involving 3D. The video you can see up top is an internal competition we had, where you had to make kind of a blue sky idea, and my team made this like après cloak, and then we made it physically. But in terms of what I learned and the resources I was given here, one of the biggest learnings for me was basically how teams operate cross-functionally. It was my first time sitting on a team, the design team that worked with the development team, that worked with the graphics team, that worked with the creative direction team, and seeing how all of those minds communicate and operate together was pretty mind-blowing for me. I feel like the 8 months I spent at Burton, I learned more in that time than the 2 years I did in my grad program, and that's absolutely no shade to my grad program. And then, yeah, some of the biggest resources that I had here were, an often overlooked one is mentorship. The team that I sat on was just this amazing group of designers, insanely talented and totally willing to share their knowledge with me. So I became a much better designer, a much better pattern maker, was starting to learn the ins and outs of being a developer, as well as tinkering in the small prototyping lab they had, and all the things like that. Burton is truly a special company for the size they're at and the product they're putting out. But ultimately, that internship turned into a short contract. I had to go back to school for my final year. And so that contract had ended, and I was able to snowball that into a 3D design role with Arc'teryx. So this was pretty much, it was a full-time job that I worked through my last year at school. And it was design adjacent. So basically, as a 3D technical specialist at Arc'teryx, myself and my team were a resource for a lot of the other teams, design, color, and all of that. And we would work with the design and pattern makers would hand us off a set of patterns that we would basically sew together or construct digitally in CLO, and we would make what you call a digital twin, which is a one-to-one recreation of what it should be like in the physical form. So that's proper garment drape, trims, fit and everything. And once my team had created that asset, it would be able to go out to a bunch of other teams to improve their workflow. So it could go back to the designer who could do work with the fit specialist to make sure the fit is looking good. It could go to the color team, and they could take the seasonal colors and mock them up on the actual product. It could go into presentations for leadership, because we believed, and I still believe, that 3D is a much better representation than a 2D tech flat. But yeah, so I can't speak too much to the actual design process behind the curtain at Arc'teryx. But I do know that they invest heavily in resources to support those processes, which is really awesome to see. But ultimately, this role wasn't creative enough for me. It wasn't hands-on enough for me. And so I was lucky enough to land a job at the North Face as a circularity designer. Um, I made this move for reasons I just mentioned. I wasn't really at Arc'teryx pushing my career and skill set in the ways that I wanted to. I wanted to get back to that, kind of scrappy, hands-on maker mentality. And this job offered that. There was a lot of like creative concepting, a lot of time spent in the proto studio, putting things together and taking them apart. We were scrappy, but we also had the resources of one of the biggest outdoor companies on the market. Um, so a little bit more about what a circular designer does at the North Face. At least my role there, I sat on a small team. There was my manager, Kellen, and our developer, Charlotte. And we always kind of joked that we were off on our own little circular island, mostly pushing ideas from the bottom up, whereas a company this big, usually ideas come from the top down. Um, but one of our biggest resources at this job was the top right, you can see a picture of this big warehouse. That's Tersus Solutions in Denver. And they're a third party company that processes, cleans, repairs, and resells a lot of gear for outdoor companies. Um, and being in Denver, we were able to get our own little corner in this warehouse. And I would spend a few days every week digging through these piles of clothes you can see, and pulling out garments that once had a high value but had lost a lot of that to wear and tear. And then it was my job to inject value back into them through custom one of a kind repairs that would then get sold as a remade product on the site. So you can see this Nupsy down here likely had a ripped sleeve or a stained sleeve and a broken zipper. And so we would come in with creative repair. And I would also do a lot of in-house workshops for designers. I'm a firm believer that one of the best ways to learn about a product is to take that product apart. And so we would get all sorts of designers into our prototyping lab doing just that. I'm going to move a little bit faster here. I spent 2 years at the North Face, and in that 2 years, I had gone through, I think, 3 reorgs, and it was the third reorg that finally got me. They kind of closed down that circular team, and they moved me over to a more inline lifestyle design team. I don't really have a whole lot of pictures to show from that time because it was fairly short-lived, and those products are still probably in development. But I stuck around because there was a huge learning opportunity for me here. I had not worked in a job that required sketching and tech packing to the level that this job would. And so I felt that was an extremely useful skill that I needed to learn. And so I worked about a season and a half doing that before I realized it was much too rigid of a process and not hands-on for me. And so, luckily for the whole 6 months that I was working this job at the North Face, I'd also been connected with Dan Durston via Pete Hill, who some of you may know. He's talked on the speaker series before. And Pete and I started talking, just kind of sharing design processes and workflows and stuff like that. And he had mentioned that I should talk to this guy, Dan, out in Golden. I was in Denver at the time, and I thought Golden was sweet. It was only 20 minutes away. It'd be awesome to, kind of form this relationship with Dan. I wasn't really thinking about a new job at that time. And then about a month later is probably when I found out that Golden was actually 18 hours by car north of where I was living. But over the few months that I was talking with Dan, he was trying to figure out how to set up an in-house design department, whatever you want to call it. And I was mostly just in the mindset of, I'll help this guy figure out like what sewing machines he needs, probably needs a laser cutter. I have a network where I could refer some people who might be able to operate all that stuff for him. And I'll just help this guy kind of get his feet on the ground in terms of an in-house design department. Over the months, that snowballed into an actual offer. He had flown myself, my girlfriend came with me up to Golden, and that kind of like solidified everything for me. Just seeing the operation here was amazing. It's exactly what I wanted to get back to. Um, I grew up, my dad owned a small business. I've always thought small business is awesome. Cottage brands are amazing. The product they put out is risky in the best way possible. It's innovative, and it's usually something that the market hasn't seen yet, which was something I was really excited to get back into. At some of these bigger companies, they're not willing to take risk at all, and everything's very formulaic. So I was excited to kind of get back to my maker's roots, as I've mentioned a number of times, and do it for a small business that was, they were about putting product out and continually improving it. With a problem to solve rather than just chasing trends, which you can see on this sticky note here. Um, and very much like a continuous improvement mindset. So it made a lot of sense for me to join them and help push their product and help them develop design processes along the way. And then also, like, having talked with Dan for a number of months before I actually joined, I was understanding that the trust they were putting behind somebody to come in and do this. And I definitely like to put myself in situations that there's a lot to be learned. And so coming in with that amount of trust and the ability to set up my own processes were huge. And I was able to take all of my past experiences that we just talked about and kind of snowball and like pick pieces out of each part of my career and implement them into the design process here and really build something. I don't want to say from the ground up, because what Dan and team have going here is absolutely amazing. And I'm just coming in to kind of take Dan's ideas and improve upon them in an in-house prototyping setting. And it's back to my roots of wearing a ton of hats, similar to the first bag shop I worked at. At the North Face, it was my job to, sketch, tech pack, and send to a factory. We had a team of material developers that, mostly they did all the materials. We had a color team. We had a costing team. There was somebody to do really any little part of the process. Whereas here, it's basically Dan and I just getting together around a whiteboard, figuring out what we want to prioritize. And then I'm working with, mills, factories, trim suppliers. I spend most of my time in our small prototyping lab where we have a laser cutter and some sewing machines putting things together. And I can really just like focus in on a product again and put out the best thing possible. So I saw the opportunity for a lot of growth here, and I'm already experiencing it just a few months in. And then finally, another reason I came up to Durston was life in Golden. For those of you who haven't been out here, I highly recommend making a trip. I've only been out here in the winter season so far, and I'm so stoked to experience summer. But this winter provided tons of snow, insane trails right out my backyard. The family owned like mentality of Durston allows me to, if it dumps snow one morning, I can go out, take a few hours off in the morning, go ride, come back. And that's usually, I have a lot of my best ideas out in the wilderness. And so coming back after a morning of ripping some knee deep powder is honestly super beneficial for my design process. I think this little like line kind of sums it up pretty well. Is prototype where you play. I can make things in the studio and then go out and put it to the test right away. And there's definitely something really special about Golden and the opportunities there. That concludes my presentations. I'm happy to take any questions. My email is below if anybody wants to reach out separately. I'm always happy to chat.
Thanks so much, Chris. I have got it set so that folks can unmute themselves and go ahead and ask a question.
Biggest challenge, honestly, the job has been amazing. The biggest challenge is probably, and it's honestly not that big of a challenge because we've been navigating it super well, but my girlfriend is still down in Denver. So kind of just, figuring out all of that. But honestly, no real big challenges. Dan and I work great together. The company is doing well enough where if I feel like I need a resource for the design department, we can get it as long as I can make a good business case for it. And I don't know, I'm working on the product that I love to work on. So I don't have a great answer for that question.
That was a perfectly good answer. Other questions?
I've got one. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Steven. I'm a grad student here in the SPD program as well. Um, and I'm curious, I'm very much aligned in the same area of interest, and there are a lot of really interesting niche companies, on top of like Arc'teryx and all these bigger companies that are based in Canada. And I've been wondering what your experience like navigating like moving to and working in another country and getting work visas and how difficult that process has been. Like, is it something that we should be afraid of, or do they make it pretty approachable?
Yeah, so I they make it pretty approachable. So for any of the bigger companies like Arc'teryx, as long as they're willing to support you on a visa for whatever role, which is something you should ask early on in any interview, they'll likely have a whole team that will set you up and get you through all that transitional stuff. So any of the big companies make it very smooth, but usually it's a slightly higher up role that they would want to hire outside of the country for. For a place like Durston, we were kind of able to work off of the Kuzma agreement. I don't actually know what that stands for, but it's like a trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico. And part of that agreement is that there's this list of certain professions that can get essentially an expedited visa. An industrial designer is one of those. So I'm an industrial designer here at Durston Gear, and basically that meant Dan, the company, didn't have to prove that they couldn't hire within the country. I essentially got the job offer, got some other paperwork together, drove to the border while I was moving up here, and you just make a case for yourself at the border, and the border agent gives you a visa or not. Um, that sounds a little scary, but it's actually a super easy process. The hardest part about all of that was essentially moving my finances across the border. That's a little bit more tricky, but it really not that hard to navigate. So if it's something you're scared about approaching, I would say don't worry about it. Just be upfront with whoever you're negotiating with about what resources they can provide you to do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, of course. We can talk about it more in class.
I've also got a question here coming in on the chat. Michael from Six Seasons Hiking, he was wondering if you're going to be at the core conference this year, Chris.
Yeah, I think myself and a few other people from the Durston team will be down there. We were just talking about that the other day.
Something to add to that is I think historically we've done the conference in early November. We've changed the timing this year. I believe it's going to be in September. We're doing it in conjunction with a really fun event that's going to be showing a Banff film screening up on the ski hill, actually. So
Cool.
if you're used to being it, yeah, in November, definitely adjust your schedule for that for September, which is also such a nice time to visit that area.
Amazing. I'm excited.
Yeah, I can't believe it's
Me
gorgeous
too.
in September. I lived there. Um, I transitioned in during COVID too to graphic design, Chris, and I love the outdoors. That's what part of the reason that drew me to Kimberly other than family. Do you have any suggestions on like how to find companies like Durston as they're starting up who would be looking for design work and stuff on the graphic design side or
Yeah, I don't know how applicable my experience is. I got really lucky with a recommendation from a mentor of mine who had already been doing a little bit of work with Durston. And the whole application process was extremely informal here. I'm actually not even sure I showed Dan a portfolio or anything, or
how you
officially
find the best
applied to a
jobs?
job here. Yeah. So I would say networking. It's something I'm super passionate about. It's what's got me to where I am today. via either networking, like for mentorship or just for career growth. All of my opportunities have come through some sort of networking.
Okay.
And the outdoor, like the cottage industry is pretty small and everybody knows each other. So you kind of really just need one good contact and then that network can spread pretty quickly.
Yeah, you know any more organizations like kind of like Core? Have you heard of that sort of like
Um,
aggregate like local areas of like outdoor enthusiasts for design for like outdoor products and stuff?
yeah, Core's definitely pretty special in what they're doing here, and I don't know really anybody that does it the way they do it. But I can think about that, and if you want to jot down my email, we can talk more. I'm sure there's some stuff out there, but Core does a really amazing job at
Yeah.
connecting people.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Chris. I actually don't know of any other organizations that are doing something like this, not in the US or in Canada.
Yeah,
Has
it's
it?
always kind of blown my mind, and I actually think there's like a huge opportunity in the states for that. Portland, Oregon has such a massive design community because they have Nike and Adidas and Columbia and all of these other companies there. So you can find like very niche small groups there all the time, but there's no one like um, person really like unifying the industry and connecting everybody other than Core, at least in the outdoor industry.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
Chris, how are you pulling from? I know you said as you said, you have lots of different hats you've worn. Are you at all like pulling from your circularity role at the North Face into your new designs here? And what do you think are the biggest limitations and opportunities when designing for circularity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a really tough thing to do, especially with technical products. I'm a pretty firm believer that there's no such thing as a sustainable product. There's like things that are less bad, and you can essentially design things to be less bad. Um, and it's always like my undergrad degree was in environmental studies. It's always been like a pretty core part of who I am to respect the environment. Um, but all of that said, even my job at the North Face as a circular designer, some things you see and you're just like, how is this happening at this scale? And things change at a scale a lot. So sustainability at a company like the North Face could look very different from sustainability at a company like Durston. Here, it's things like we offer repair and we'll do whatever we can to keep people using their product longer. We're a big part of my role here is designing for durability. Because a lot of our packs go out and do, a triple crown or, the PCT or something like that. So they need to last a while just because of the nature of our community, but also just because I'm a firm believer that that's one of the best ways to make a product sustainable is just have it last longer. So it's like pretty simple concepts like that I bring along with me. I don't think Durston will be setting up like a recycling program or anything like that, at least not anytime soon. So you kind of have to like pick and choose your battles, but ultimately just create durable product that is durable physically and also like emotionally, like something that people will want to use for decades.
Oh, second question, how about repairability for tents and gear and things that you're using outside?
Yeah, I mean, our main solution, well, we have a few solutions for that, is in-house repair. So pretty much anybody can contact us via our website or Reddit or whatever your preferred method is, and send their product back. And almost always we'll repair it in a timely manner and get it back to you. And then in terms of like designing for repair, yeah, we kind of just, I think a big push for us in the future, it's only been like whispered around the office a little bit, is kind of like more education on field repair. A lot of our product, people are almost never tearing their tent at their home. It's usually when they're miles down a trail. So just educating people more on how a lot of common issues can be fixed pretty easily. And then again, just building the most durable product we can, which is a fine line when you're also building the lightest product you possibly can.
Wanted to chime in here. Michael also reminded me that we do have in BC a BC Apparel and Gear Association. So if you Google that, it'll take you right to their website. They also have an Instagram account. So that's another opportunity for networking here in BC.
Hey, Chris, question here from Hamza.
Hey.
So I recently moved out to Manchester, New Hampshire. I know you mentioned you went to school in Burlington. It's not far. So I've been in the White Mountains a little bit. I come from a material science background and material scientist by trade. I'm curious, when you're looking at materials for your products, I guess what drives you to a new material, a new product? And I know you said you mentioned working with mills and factories. I guess a problem I've seen, like, I'm in the medical space, but I also have products that, like, you'll work with a factory and then they'll discontinue something, or you want to optimize it for the customer, but then it ends up being too expensive. And then, some materials are really great for certain aspects, but bad in other aspects. So I wanted to get your take on selecting materials, and then what materials you're excited about using in the upcoming seasons.
Yeah, I think material science is one of the coolest ways and one of the biggest opportunities for innovation in at least the outdoor space, and I'm sure a ton of other spaces. But basically, we have here at Durston, we have a very small product offering, which lends itself to basically getting really dialed in with the materials that we use in those products. At the North Face, I would walk downstairs and there was a material library of thousands of materials that I could pick from, which is overwhelming at times. But here we kind of, again, there's this trade-off between basically product or material that's as durable as it can be, while counting every single gram. And a lot of our products, most of the weight comes from the material. So that's a huge thing that we look into. And it's pretty, there's Dyneema has been a leader in the outdoor industry for a long time, and other companies will come in and improve upon kind of the ideas that they have. One company that we're always super stoked to work with is Alula. They come out of the kite surfing, wind sports industry, which a lot of the materials used for packs and bags has come out of that industry. But they have a lot of special things going for them. It's extremely lightweight and durable, abrasion resistant, all that good stuff. It can bond to itself with a good bit of heat and time. You actually don't need stitching theoretically in your products, which allows for some really cool new construction methods. We were the first company to put out an Alula pack. And you're starting to see more and more pop up. Durston Gear just put one out. DB has a few Alula products. But that landscape will always be changing, and we just try to stay at the forefront of it. Again, just balancing that durability with lightweightness.
What are you doing at Durston right now that has you the most stoked?
Yeah, so basically we have a big update to one of our products happening, which has been super fun. It's basically one of the Alula products, I guess the only Alula product we have out there. But kind of a little bit of what I just talked about is updating some construction methods and whatnot, and just stressing all of the details and really taking it to a Gen 2 version of it. Working on a brand new product, and that's about all I can say there, which is super exciting. It'll be really my first product that I've taken from start to finish at any company and putting it out there. And we're already seeing some really cool results in the technology. Pretty much all of our projects are me and Dan getting together and just, we spend hours every week around a whiteboard just brainstorming how this product can be the best it possibly can, everything from material science to construction to new features and things like that. And then a lot of my time is also makes up of like making processes and documenting it here so that in the future we have more of like a standards manual kind of thing for how design happens at Durston, as well as a lot of updates. Pretty much every production run we do for any product gets some sort of update. So it's really stressing all of the details. Which one thing I forgot to mention in my presentation is one of the best resources that we have here at Durston Gear is our community. We have a lot of people who are very willing to share their opinion of our product, for better or worse, but for most of the time it's better. As a designer, having tens of thousands of people online willing to kind of tear our stuff apart and tell us what they think about it is a huge resource. So Dan and I take a lot of the feedback we get from our community and implement what we think makes sense into our product. So it's lots of small continuous updates that I'm always working on.
Nice. All right, we have time for one more question if there's any.
Hi, Chris. Just kind of going off the last question, I wanted to ask about what that process of improving a product between versions is like at a company like Durston versus a bigger company like the North Face or Arc'teryx, and what your experience in that has been.
Yeah, definitely. That's great because the two processes are extremely different. So usually I'll go through like a bigger company's process first, and this is just my experience and it changes from company to company. But oftentimes you'll put out a product. A lot of these products at bigger companies are driven off trend reports and things like that, even some of the performance products. And so you spend essentially 2 years making the product to the best possible level or quality you can, and then you put it out in the market. And then you usually wait a few years. Like the next season might get a color update or something like that. But like an actual feature update or even overhaul of something might only happen to the big franchises like a Mountain Jacket or a Nupsy or something like that. Whereas at Durston, it's a continuous loop of feedback from ourselves. Super lucky to work with Dan because he's he doesn't have a background in design, but he understands what he wants because he's spent thousands and thousands of miles out on the trail. So he's kind of like my own little like athlete database where I can just ask him questions about how things work best out in the field. And so we're constantly taking his ideas as well as the feedback from our community, which again, we get lots of feedback from our community, and then kind of weighing the options. We obviously won't do everything the community says because that would just not be a good way to develop products. So we look at the things that make sense. Sometimes a feature update might mean the product will now cost more or it'll be a little bit heavier. And so there's lots of options to weigh here. But for a lot of our products, I think we produce a set number, every 3 to 4 months. And pretty much each of those production runs are, maybe we're changing the grow grain ribbon to an actual webbing, or we're just, slightly changing how the zipper meets at the bottom of a tent door or something like that. And so it's not looking at big picture improvements. It's looking at like the small things that will make this product more efficient, more cost effective, more durable, and a lot of things. And so you don't have to look at like overhauling the product like every season. You just kind of do a few small updates here and there.
Awesome. That's super interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just shoot one last question out there. Chris, if you're advising anyone to get into like making their own gear at home, anything you guys recommend to get started?
Yeah, I mean, the internet and a little home sewing machine are a pretty deadly combo. There's an insane amount of resources out there. I would say make products that you're stoked to get out and use. because yeah, it's the best way to figure out how to improve things if you can like go out and use it and understand, oh, maybe the shoulder straps, the padding's not quite as thick as you want, or they come in at the wrong angle or something like that. But in terms of like the actual like knowledge you need for pattern making and whatnot, YouTube, it's a great resource, and there's a number of Instagram pages. I'm a huge advocate for 3D design. I can basically design an entire pack in Clo 3D and then take it to a laser cutter and a sewing machine and have a super well fitting product. So that saves me a lot of time and money on like resources for personal projects. But like mostly just start doing it. It's going to be intimidating. You're probably going to make like some pretty shit product to begin with, but it'll get better and better. And to the point where you're like stoked to put it out in the world and I don't know, put it on your friends' backs or whatever. And that's when it really starts to feel good. And that's what makes me stoked as a designer.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chris, so much. And thanks, everyone. That concludes the Core Outdoors webinar for March. I'll be back with another industry expert in late April. You can stay tuned to Core's social media channels or sign up online on their website to get email notifications. All right, it's a wrap. Feel free to go ahead and come off mute and say goodbye, and I'll sign off the meeting.